Imagine walking into a funeral home late at night, the air thick with the scent of wax and embalming fluids, the dim light flickering across polished caskets. You think you're there to mourn, but what if the mourners themselves were in danger? What if the very people you trusted to care for the dead were feeding a darkness far worse than death itself? This is the story of the Blackwood family. For decades, they operated one of the most respected funeral homes in the heart of rural New England. On the surface, they were impeccable, polite, comforting, and always impeccably dressed. But behind closed doors, a chilling truth festered, a truth that blurred the line between life and death. It began on a rainy autumn night. Lightning slashed across the sky, illuminating the black spires of the funeral home. The front doors creaked as Eleanor Blackwood, the matriarch, ushered a grieving widow into the dimly lit parlor. The smell of polished wood mixed with something sharper, something metallic. The widow shivered but didn't question it. Who would? Blackwood's reputation was flawless. In the embalming room, faint echoes of dripping water mingled with the low hum of the refrigeration units. Young Daniel, the son, carefully prepared the body of a local man who had passed unexpectedly. His hands moved with surgical precision, yet there was a strange intensity in his eyes, as though he saw beyond the corpse, into the living heart of the man beneath. Outside, the storm rattled the windows, masking the faint sounds of movement from the upper floors. The family had rules, unwritten but strict. Never leave a client unattended, never speak of what really happened in the night, and always, always keep the doors locked after midnight. On this particular night, a peculiar visitor arrived, an insurance agent with documents for the deceased. He was polite but nervous, glancing over his chaise holder as if the shadows themselves were watching. Eleanor smiled warmly, offering tea and cookies, while the son and daughter moved silently in the background. Every step they took was deliberate, calculated. The visitor didn't realize that the scent he thought was just the polish on the floors was something else entirely, something darker, lingering in the corners of the home. By the time the clock struck midnight, the visitor had vanished, without a word, without a trace. No one would speak of him again. And the Blackwood family returned to their routine as if nothing had happened. But a new, unsettling energy had taken root in the funeral home, one that would grow with each passing night. Next, we will uncover the strange habits of the Blackwood children and the terrifying secret that bound the family together. Before we go deeper, understand this. This story isn't for everyone. If you're still here, you're one of the few who can face what America buried. Subscribe now, and tell me in the comments, what state are you listening from? And would you dare hear this story from your own backyard? Section 2. The Children of Blackwood. The Blackwood children were unlike any other in the small town. Daniel and his younger sister Lillian moved through the funeral home as if it were their natural habitat. Their presence was quiet, almost ghost-like, but their eyes betrayed a sharp intelligence and something far colder. They were never seen playing outside with other children, never heard laughing in the streets. Instead, they lingered in hallways lined with coffins, their whispers echoing off marble floors. Daniel had a fascination with anatomy that unnerved even the most hardened morticians. He would spend hours studying the embalmed bodies, tracing the lines of veins and muscles, memorizing the exact placement of every organ. Lillian, meanwhile, preferred the living. She would watch clients with a subtle intensity, noticing the slight tremor in a hand, the nervous tick of a jaw, as if she could read their very thoughts. Townsfolk often described her as creepy but polite, never realizing how close they were to her calculating gaze. One evening, the children found a stray dog near the edge of the property. It was thin, its fur matted, shivering in the cold drizzle. Daniel approached with caution, whispering words that sounded strangely like comfort, but not for the dog. Lillian smiled faintly, her eyes glinting with something unspoken. By the next morning, the dog was gone, and a faint metallic scent lingered in the air. When neighbors asked, the children's father, Harold, only said, "Some things are better left unseen." The funeral home itself seemed to pulse with life at night. The polished floors reflected the candlelight in the chapel, creating illusions of figures moving where no one stood. Daniel and Lillian would wander these corridors after everyone else had gone to bed, their footsteps silent. They seemed drawn to the faint smells, the mix of formaldehyde, hide, wax, and something earthy, almost alive. It was as if the building itself breathed with their presence, guiding them deeper into its hidden corners. One night, Lillian whispered to her brother about a visitor she had spotted through the frosted glass of the front door. A man had come seeking shelter from the rain, polite but weary, clutching his briefcase tightly. The children's eyes gleamed in unison. "He doesn't belong here," she said softly. Daniel nodded, and together they descended the main staircase, moving like shadows toward the unsuspecting guest. Harold watched from the upper balcony, his hands clasped behind his back. There was pride in his eyes, though it was mixed with a strange intensity. "Teach them well," he murmured to himself. "The living can be guided, or removed. Always remember, control is everything." By midnight the man had vanished, and the house smelled faintly of smoke and iron. Not a single soul in town knew where he had gone, or that he had ever arrived. The Blackwood children returned to their chambers, slipping under their heavy blankets, eyes glinting with a secret understanding. But that night, something new stirred in the house. A sound, faint but deliberate, echoing through the embalming room, something that even Harold paused to listen to. It was the first sign that their carefully hidden world was beginning to fracture. Next, we explore the first night an outsider truly uncovers the Blackwood's secret, and the chilling events that follow will shake the entire town. Section 3. A Stranger at the Door. It was a bitter winter evening when the first outsider arrived who would truly test the Blackwood's control. The wind rattled the windows like skeletal fingers tapping against the glass, carrying a biting chill that cut through even the thick velvet curtains of the funeral parlor. His name was Samuel Hargrove, a traveling journalist seeking to write a feature on small-town funeral practices. He had heard whispers of the Blackwood family, of their impeccable funeral home, their meticulous attention to detail, but nothing suggested the darkness that truly lurked inside. He pushed open the heavy oak doors and was immediately greeted by Eleanor's practiced smile. The warmth of the fireplace contrasted sharply with the icy wind outside, yet Samuel felt a subtle unease, as if the shadows themselves were observing him. Eleanor's eyes lingered just a second too long, her voice smooth as silk as she offered him tea. Behind her, the polished caskets gleamed under dim lighting, each reflecting the room like a silent accusation. The children, Daniel and Lillian, observed from the periphery, faces pale in the candlelight. They did not move, only watched, their gaze dissecting Samuel like a subject on an operating table. The funeral home had rules. Strangers were rare, and strangers were dangerous. Yet something about Samuel made them curious. He smelled differently, carried an air of investigation that the family wasn't accustomed to. As Eleanor guided him through the chapel, explaining the process of embalming and the care given to each body, Samuel noticed small anomalies. A faint metallic scent lingered in the corners, stronger than the usual formaldehyde. Shadows in the hallways seemed to twist unnaturally, elongating toward him like dark fingers. He chalked it up to nerves, yet the hairs on the back of his neck refused to lie. In the embalming room, Daniel demonstrated the process with unnerving precision. His hands moved over the cadaver with meticulous care, but Samuel couldn't shake the feeling that Daniel's eyes were not just observing the body. They were observing him. Lillian lingered behind the curtain, her fingers tracing the edges of jars filled with unknown substances. She whispered something so faintly that even Daniel paused to listen. Samuel didn't hear the words, but a chill ran down his spine. By the time the evening shadows deepened into night, Samuel felt trapped in a labyrinth of polished wood and muted whispers. The clock struck 10, and the family insisted he stay for dinner. The table was lavish, yet something was off. The food seemed almost ritualistic, the placement of utensils precise to an unsettling degree. Conversation flowed easily, yet Samuel sensed that every word he spoke was being dissected, measured, weighed. Later, alone in his room at the funeral home's guest wing, Samuel heard soft scratching at the door. At first he thought it was the storm, but the sound grew deliberate, rhythmic. He opened the door. Nothing. only the faint, lingering metallic scent of something forbidden. The hairs on his arms stood rigid. Outside his window, a shadow moved across the roof, fast and silent. A voice, barely audible, whispered his name. Samuel froze. Whoever, or whatever he had walked in on, was watching, waiting. And the Blackwoods were no longer just hospitable hosts. They were predators, and he had become prey. Next, we will follow Samuel as he begins to uncover the horrifying rituals hidden within the walls of the funeral home, and the dangerous truths that the Blackwood family will stop at nothing to protect. Section 4. The Rituals of Blackwood. Samuel couldn't sleep. Every creak of the old wooden floors sounded like footsteps approaching his room, every whisper of the wind a voice calling from the shadows. He had come to Blackwood's funeral home expecting quaint customs and historical charm. What he found was something else entirely. A living house, one that breathed darkness. Drawn by a mix of curiosity and fear, Samuel slipped from his room under the heavy velvet curtains of midnight. The house was silent now, the storm outside having passed, leaving only the hiss of the wind through the skeletal trees. Yet inside, the hall seemed alive, the polished wood reflecting his own anxious eyes back at him. Every corner held a secret. Every shadow moved slightly when he wasn't looking directly at it. The faint glow of candlelight drew him toward the embalming room. There, he saw Daniel and Lillian kneeling before a table that was not a corpse, at least not fully. Their hands moved with reverent precision, performing a ritual that seemed part preparation, part incantation. Jars of strange powders lined the shelves, each contained powders that shimmered faintly in the flickering candlelight. The air was thick with the scent of formaldehyde, blood, and something metallic, iron-like, almost alive. Samuel froze in the doorway. He knew he shouldn't watch, yet he couldn't look away. Eleanor appeared from the shadows, her presence sudden, almost ghost-like. "Curiosity can be dangerous, Mr. Hargrove," she said softly, her voice smooth as glass. "But you seem unafraid. That is interesting." Daniel and Lillian didn't react. Their focus was absolute, their movements precise, almost mechanical. Yet there was intelligence there, a spark of something beyond ordinary comprehension. Lillian whispered instructions, and Daniel obeyed without hesitation. They were conducting the final stages of the family's secret, a ritual said to guide the living into the care of the dead. The words themselves made Samuel's stomach churn. The ritual was mesmerizing and horrifying. Candles flickered, casting grotesque shadows across the walls. The air hummed faintly, vibrating in a rhythm that Samuel could feel in his chest. Every sense was heightened, the metallic tang in the air, the low, murmured whispers, the faint brush of movement at the corner of his eye. For a moment, he thought he saw figures emerging from the shadows, silent and spectral, but when he blinked, they were gone. Eleanor stepped closer. "You have seen enough to understand, or perhaps to fear," she said. "The world sees death as final. We know it is only the beginning." Her words carried weight, heavy and chilling, as if the house itself were listening. Samuel stumbled backward, the floorboards groaning underfoot. The children's eyes snapped toward him for the first time. Lillian's gaze was cold but curious. Daniel's, calculating. They were assessing him, not as a visitor, but as a potential variable in a system they controlled entirely. Suddenly, a loud bang echoed from the far wing of the house, as if someone or something had slammed a door. The candles flickered violently, plunging the room into near darkness. The metallic scent intensified. Samuel's breath came fast, shallow, and for the first time he realized he might not leave the house alive. Outside, a shadow passed across the windows. Eleanor smiled faintly, a predatory glint in her eyes. "It begins," she whispered, "and there is no turning back." Next, we will follow Samuel as he becomes trapped in the Blackwood home overnight, forced to witness horrors that blur the line between life and death, and the family's true intentions begin to surface. Section 5. Trapped in the House of Shadows. Samuel's heart pounded in his chest, each beat echoing in the silence of the funeral home. The door behind him had slammed shut, and no matter how he tried, it refused to budge. The old lock, polished and ancient, held firm. Panic gripped him, and the shadows in the hallways seemed to pulse with a life of their own. He realized, with sinking dread, that the Blackwoods did not merely welcome outsiders, they ensnared them. The candlelight flickered, casting grotesque forms along the walls. A faint scraping echoed from the upper floors. Samuel froze. Every instinct screamed at him to run, yet he felt drawn deeper into the house, as if some unseen force was guiding his steps. The metallic scent in the air had grown overpowering, sharp and almost acidic, making him gag as he stumbled down the long corridor lined with polished coffins. Daniel and Lillian appeared from the shadows, silent and deliberate, their movements eerily synchronized. "You shouldn't be here," Daniel said, his voice low and controlled. "But now that you are—" Lillian's lips curved into a faint, unsettling smile. "You will learn the truth of Blackwood." They led him, not with force, but with an unnerving authority, down a narrow staircase that spiraled into the depths of the house. The air grew colder, damp with the smell of earth and decay. At the bottom, a hidden chamber revealed itself, a room that seemed carved from the very bones of the house. Candles lined the walls, illuminating rows of jars containing unidentifiable substances, each glowing faintly in the dim light. Eleanor appeared from the shadows behind them, gliding across the stone floor as if floating. "The living fear death," she said softly. "But we guide them. Every life that enters this house has a role. Some stay longer than others." Her gaze lingered on Samuel, sharp and penetrating. "Tonight, you will see why." Samuel's stomach churned as he realized the truth. The family did not merely prepare bodies for burial, they manipulated life itself. Those who entered the home became part of the family's ritual. Some were released, unscathed, but forever changed. Others vanished, leaving only echoes and the faint metallic scent that lingered in the house. A sudden sound, a low guttural moan, filled the chamber. Samuel's breath caught. From the shadows emerged a figure, half-hidden, trembling and wide-eyed. The child's face was pale, lips quivering. They don't let you leave," it whispered, its voice barely audible. The Blackwoods did not respond, only observed with clinical detachment. Samuel backed toward the door, but it was gone. The walls themselves seemed to have shifted, enclosing him. Panic surged through him, raw and suffocating. He realized he was no longer merely a visitor. He was prey, and the prey of the Blackwood family had only one path: submission or disappearance. Suddenly, a soft scraping echoed from the ceiling above. The metallic scent intensified, thick in his lungs. Something moved, unseen but deliberate, stalking him through the house. The shadows seemed to twist and grow, enveloping him in darkness that smelled of iron and decay. Before Samuel could decide which way to flee, Daniel stepped forward. "There is no escape tonight," he said. "Only the lesson." Lillian whispered behind him, "And some lessons are eternal." Next, the horrors of the Blackwood night fully revealed themselves. Samuel will confront the family's most terrifying ritual yet, and the line between life and death will blur in ways he never imagined. Section 6. The Heart of the Ritual. The chamber was silent, yet the air vibrated with a low, almost imperceptible hum. Samuel's senses were on high alert. Every flicker of candlelight cast shadows that seemed to crawl across the walls. The metallic scent hung heavy, almost suffocating, mingling with the faint, earthy aroma of damp stone. He realized he was standing in the epicenter of something horrifying, something orchestrated with meticulous care over decades. Daniel and Lillian moved in perfect unison, their hands tracing lines in the air, drawing symbols that Samuel couldn't recognize. Eleanor watched from the shadows, serene yet terrifying, her gaze fixed on him with a predator's patience. The ritual was not just for the dead, it was for the living, for control, for the family's insidious understanding of power. Samuel noticed the jars lining the walls. Some contained powders that shimmered like ground gemstones. Others held strange liquids, dark and viscous. There were bones, carefully cleaned and polished, arranged like instruments in a macabre symphony. The children moved among these objects with reverence, as if they were sacred tools in a ceremony older than the house itself. A strange sound drew Samuel's attention, a low, rhythmic thumping, almost like a heartbeat. It seemed to emanate from the center of the chamber, beneath a large, polished stone slab. The children knelt on either side, hands resting lightly on the stone, their heads bowed. Eleanor whispered words in a language Samuel didn't understand, her voice hypnotic, carrying through the room like a chant. Suddenly, the slab began to vibrate. Samuel stepped back instinctively, his pulse raced. The thumping grew louder, almost deafening, and the metallic scent intensified, filling his lungs with a taste of iron. Something beneath the shifted, moving, alive. "You are witnessing the transformation of control," Eleanor said softly. "The living may enter, but only through our guidance do they truly exist, or cease." A low groan echoed from beneath the slab. Samuel's stomach lurched. He saw movement, limbs pale and trembling, pushing against invisible restraints. The children's hands glowed faintly in the candlelight, tracing patterns in the air, drawing power from some dark force that pulsed beneath the stone. Samuel tried to back away, but the room itself seemed to tighten around him. Shadows stretched, wrapping the corners, whispering in voices he could almost understand. The jarred powders glimmered as if alive, and the metallic scent thickened into a tangible weight that pressed down on his chest. He realized with horror that this was no ordinary funeral home ritual. This was a deliberate, living manipulation of life and death itself. Lillian turned toward him, eyes glinting. "Do you see now?" she asked softly. "We guide, we shape, we claim." Daniel's gaze followed hers, unwavering and cold. Eleanor's smile widened, serene and terrifying. Samuel's knees buckled, fear overtaking reason. He was trapped in the heart of the Blackwood family's power, a witness to a darkness no outsider had survived to tell. And yet, he could not look away. From the corner of his eye, he noticed the shadows lengthening, reaching, as though the house itself were alive and hungry. The slab quivered violently, and a faint cry, a mix of terror and despair, escaped from beneath it. Next, Samuel will face the unthinkable, a choice that could save his life or bind him forever to the Blackwood's world of control and death. Section 7. A choice between life and shadows. Samuel's chest heaved as he stumbled backward, eyes locked on the vibrating stone slab. The metallic scent in the chamber was suffocating now, almost choking him, mixing with the faint odor of decay that clung to the walls. The shadows flickered and stretched unnaturally, moving closer as if the room itself was alive, breathing, watching, and judging him. Eleanor stepped forward, calm and deliberate, her high heels clicking on the cold stone floor. "Every visitor has a choice," she said softly. "Submission or disappearance, observation or participation. Tonight you may leave or join us." Her words were smooth, almost hypnotic, carrying the weight of authority that Samuel couldn't resist. Daniel and Lillian knelt beside the stone slab, hands tracing patterns that glowed faintly in the candlelight. Beneath it, the faint movements of a figure trapped in some unseen force drew Samuel's gaze. The figure writhed, muffled cries escaping into the thick air, and Samuel realized the Blackwood's rituals were not just symbolic. They were deadly, deliberate, and precise. The choice presented itself like a knife at his throat. Eleanor's eyes locked onto his, and he felt the pull of the family's power. To resist meant risking everything. To comply meant entering a world that no outsider had ever returned from unchanged. His instincts screamed to flee, yet every exit he had seen was either blocked or impossible. Lillian moved closer, her pale fingers brushing a small, glowing jar. "The path is simple," she whispered, her voice chillingly sweet. "Take what you can, witness what you must, or be claimed." Her eyes glimmered like cold steel in the candlelight. Samuel's mind raced. Every horror he had witnessed, the whispered chants, the metallic scent, the living manipulation of life and death, pressed against him like a vice. He thought of the townsfolk, of the strangers who had vanished without a trace, and the children he had glimpsed playing with forces no mortal should touch. The Blackwoods had rules, yes, but they were rules built to trap, to control, and to consume. A sudden creak echoed from the ceiling above. The shadows surged, wrapping along the walls, sliding toward him. Daniel's hand shot out, palm open, and the air seemed to shimmer with unseen energy. Samuel staggered back, the cold stone floor cutting into his knees. The room pulsed with life, dark, sentient, and hungry. "Decide," Eleanor said softly, almost a whisper. "Life is fleeting. We make it eternal, or we erase it." Her gaze pierced him like a blade. Samuel realized that hesitation could be as fatal as resistance. Sweat streamed down his face, his hands shook uncontrollably, and then, with a deep, shuddering breath, he stepped forward toward the ritual, toward the unknown, toward the family that had already decided he would play their game. As he crossed the threshold, the room seemed to exhale, shadows recoiling slightly, leaving only a narrow path to the stone slab. Beneath it, the trapped figure's muffled cries became clearer, sobbing, pleading, terrified. And Samuel understood, with a cold certainty, that what awaited him might not be escape, but the very darkness he had come to witness. Next, Samuel will be forced into the heart of the Blackwoods ritual, confronting horrors no human should endure, and the family's true purpose will begin to reveal itself in terrifying clarity. Section 8. Into the heart of darkness. The moment Samuel stepped closer to the stone slab, the air thickened. It pressed against his skin like a living thing, heavy with iron, decay, and something indefinable, something that made his lungs burn and his vision blur at the edges. Shadows stretched along the walls, twisting unnaturally, writhing like smoke with purpose. He could feel them pulling at his consciousness, tugging at his fear, his hesitation, his very thoughts. Daniel's hands hovered over the glowing symbols etched into the floor. Each movement traced invisible lines in the air, patterns that seemed to hum with life. Lillian circled the slab, whispering in a language Samuel could not comprehend, yet understood with a primal clarity. The words vibrated through his bones, and he felt the pulse of the house itself, like the slow heartbeat of some colossal, predatory creature. Beneath the slab, the trapped figure shifted. Samuel could finally see them, a man, eyes wide with terror, pressed against invisible restraints. His muffled cries sent shivers through Samuel's spine. It was no act. The horror was real. He realized with a sickening clarity that the Blackwoods had perfected a method of controlling the living, bending their fear, their flesh, even their will, into the family's ritual. Eleanor stepped forward, her presence magnetic and terrifying. "The living can become guides," she said softly, "or they can become lessons. Tonight, Samuel, you will learn the difference." Her eyes bore into his, a gaze that seemed to reach beyond flesh, beyond logic, into the raw core of his being. Samuel's pulse raced. Every instinct screamed to flee, but the house would not allow it. The shadows pulsed in response to his fear, moving closer, brushing his skin with whispers of cold steel and rot. He felt as if he were being observed by 1,000 unseen eyes, each one waiting for the exact moment to strike. "Step forward," Daniel said, his voice calm, controlled, yet impossibly commanding. Samuel obeyed, drawn by a force he could not explain. Every step toward the slab felt like sinking into water, slow and suffocating, yet inevitable. He could hear his own heartbeat, thundering in rhythm with the vibrations of the stone beneath him. Lillian extended her hand, fingers pale and delicate, brushing against the glowing jars on the floor. "Do you understand now?" she whispered. "Life and death are tools. Fear and obedience are instruments." The jars shimmered, each containing powders that seemed to move as if alive, crawling in slow, deliberate patterns. Samuel reached the slab, his knees trembling. The trapped man beneath it moaned again, voice raw and desperate. The ritual intensified, the candles flared, casting grotesque shadows across the walls. The metallic scent became almost unbearable, a tangible weight pressing down on him. He realized then that the Blackwoods didn't just preside over death, they manipulated the essence of living flesh, bending will and fear into something they alone could control. A low hum filled the chamber, vibrating in the stone floor, the walls, and through Samuel's own bones. Eleanor's whisper echoed, "Once you cross this threshold, there is no return. The choice is no longer yours." The slab began to pulse beneath his hands, a heartbeat of darkness, and Samuel understood, with a sinking, icy certainty, that the real terror had only just begun. Next, Samuel will confront the first horrifying consequence of the ritual and witness the true nature of the Blackwoods' power over life and death. Section 9. The first consequence. The pulse beneath the stone slab quickened, thrumming like a heartbeat that wasn't Samuel's own. The trapped man writhed violently, a distorted shadow of life caught between fear and flesh. Samuel's stomach churned as the metallic scent grew unbearable, thick and clinging to his lungs, burning with each shallow breath. Every instinct screamed for him to retreat, but there was nowhere to go. Daniel leaned closer, hands tracing intricate patterns over the floor's glowing symbols. Lillian circled the slab, her voice rising in an eerie chant. The candles flared, throwing grotesque shadows across the walls, elongated shapes that seemed to reach for Samuel, grasping at him, whispering in voices he could almost understand. Suddenly, the trapped man let out a blood-curdling scream. The sound reverberated in the chamber, rattling the jars on the shelves and sending the shadows quivering in the corners. Samuel's knees buckled as the horror sank in. The Blackwoods did not merely guide the living, they reshaped their very experience of fear, amplifying it, controlling it, weaponizing it. Eleanor stepped closer, her presence a wave of cold authority. "Do you see now?" she asked softly, almost kindly, yet every word was laced with inevitability. "This is the lesson. Life is fragile, fear is a tool, and the living are malleable." Her eyes glinted in the candlelight, fixed on Samuel as though weighing the measure of his courage. The slab vibrated violently. Samuel's hands gripped its edge, the stone rough and impossibly cold beneath his fingers. The trapped man convulsed, his cries mixing with the rhythmic hum of the ritual. Samuel felt it then, a creeping, insidious pressure in his own mind, as though the house itself were probing him, testing his limits. Shadows danced at the edge of his vision, fleeting yet deliberate, like the hands of something unseen brushing against his consciousness. Daniel's voice cut through the chamber, calm and unyielding. "You cannot interfere, only observe, only learn." Yet Samuel felt an uncontrollable pull toward the slab. Part of him wanted to flee, but another, darker part, a primal curiosity, drew him closer. Lillian's chant grew louder, echoing through the stone walls. The jars trembled, powders shifting like living creatures. A faint, metallic mist rose from the slab, curling into the air around Samuel. He coughed violently, the scent sharp and suffocating, yet he could not tear his eyes from the figure beneath. Then it happened. The man beneath the slab went still. His body stiffened unnaturally, eyes wide with terror, and the rhythmic pulse beneath the stone stopped as suddenly as a snapped cord. Silence fell. A silence that pressed against Samuel's skull, heavy and absolute. He wanted to step back, to scream, to run, but his legs refused to obey. Eleanor's voice whispered, almost a caress. "The first lesson is complete. Fear is not simply felt, it is harvested." She turned her gaze toward Samuel, and for the first time, the weight of the family's true power pressed fully upon him. The shadows shifted again, taller now, more deliberate, curling around the edges of the chamber like living smoke. Samuel realized with a cold certainty that the night was far from over, and that the Blackwoods' rituals would continue long after his first glimpse of horror. Next, Samuel will be forced to participate directly in the ritual, confronting the terrifying truth of the Blackwoods' manipulation over life and the living. Disclaimer: this story is a work of fiction. Any resemblance to real persons, places, or events is purely coincidental. Section 10. Forced into the ritual. Samuel staggered back from the stone slab, his body trembling with fear and exhaustion. The metallic scent clung to his skin, sharp and bitter, making every breath a struggle. The shadows twisted closer, moving like living fingers along the walls, curling around the jars, the candles, and his own trembling figure. He realized then, with a chilling clarity, he was no longer just a witness. He was part of the ritual. Eleanor stepped forward, her calm presence dominating the chamber. "You've seen the first lesson," she said softly. "Now it is your turn. To survive, you must participate. To participate, you must understand. Control is everything." Her eyes glimmered with a predator's patience, and Samuel felt the invisible weight of the house pressing down on him, commanding obedience. Daniel and Lillian moved to the sides of the slab, guiding him wordlessly. Their hands hovered above the glowing patterns etched into the stone, tracing lines that seemed to pulse with unseen energy. Samuel's mind raced. Every instinct screamed to resist, to run, to escape, but every exit he had glimpsed was gone, and every shadow seemed to pulse with the knowledge that any defiance would be fatal. "Touch the slab," Daniel said, his voice calm, almost hypnotic. "Feel the pulse. Understand it." Samuel's hands shook violently as he approached. The stone was cold, impossibly smooth, yet it vibrated beneath his fingers, as if alive. A low, rhythmic hum coursed through his body, reverberating in his bones. Lillian whispered a chant, soft and deliberate. The metallic mist from the jars coiled around Samuel's arms, wrapping like cold serpents. He could feel the pulse of the ritual, the living energy of the Blackwood's manipulation of fear and life itself. It was intoxicating, terrifying, and suffocating all at once. Samuel hesitated. One choice would bind he. I'm to the ritual, force him to participate, and perhaps allow him to survive the night. The other resistance meant disappearing entirely, like the strangers he had read about in hushed local whispers, people who entered the house and were never seen again. With a deep, shuddering breath, Samuel placed his hands on the stone. The pulse surged through him instantly, cold and electric, making his muscles quiver. Shadows stretched across the room, curling toward him as if welcoming him into their fold. Eleanor's eyes held his, a silent command, a promise and a threat entwined. The trapped figure beneath the slab twitched violently, muffled cries echoing into Samuel's ears. Every instinct screamed at him to pull away, yet the ritual demanded focus. Daniel and Lillian guided his hands, their touch deliberate, teaching him the rhythm, the motion, the precise sequence that the family had honed over decades. Suddenly, the hum intensified, almost deafening, vibrating through the stone and into Samuel's body. The metallic mist thickened, stinging his eyes and throat. Shadows coiled around the slab, then around him, like the house itself was breathing, alive with purpose. Samuel realized, with absolute clarity, that this was no mere ritual. It was a trial, a test of survival, a demonstration of the Blackwood's absolute control over the living. And as the first wave of the ritual's power surged through him, Samuel understood that tonight, nothing would ever be the same. Every choice, every breath, every thought was now entangled with the house, the family, and the darkness that thrived within them. Next, Samuel will feel the ritual's horrifying effects, his body and mind pushed to their limits, and the Blackwood's true plan for him will begin to reveal itself. Section 11. When Fear Becomes Flesh. The moment the pulse surged through Samuel's palms, something inside him shifted. It wasn't pain, not at first. It was awareness. The stone beneath his hands felt warm now, vibrating in sync with his own heartbeat. The hum inside the chamber grew sharper, more concentrated, as though tuning itself to his breathing. Every shadow on the wall leaned inward, narrowing the space around him. The metallic mist thickened until it coated his tongue with the unmistakable taste of iron. And then he felt it. A second heartbeat. It wasn't beneath the slab. It was inside his chest. Samuel gasped, jerking back. But Daniel's grip tightened on his wrist. Lillian's cold fingers pressed firmly against his other hand, forcing his palms flat against the stone once more. Stay with it. Daniel said calmly. "Let it enter," Lillian whispered. The pulse surged again, harder this time. Samuel's vision fractured. The chamber flickered between candlelit stone and something older, darker. For brief flashes, the walls looked drenched in shadowy handprints. The jars lining the shelves appeared filled with something moving, writhing just beneath their glass surfaces. He tried to scream, but his throat constricted. Memories began flooding his mind. Except they weren't his. A man begging in the dark. A woman whispering promises to be let go. The sound of a locked door. The feeling of breath running out. Samuel staggered, but his hands would not release the slab. It felt as if invisible tendons had threaded through his fingers, anchoring him to the ritual. His heartbeat thundered painfully against his ribs. Eleanor stepped closer. "This," she said gently, "is empathy refined. We do not kill the living carelessly. We draw out what makes them most alive." Samuel's chest tightened as panic wrapped around his lungs. "You harvest fear," he choked. Eleanor smiled faintly. "Fear is truth without dis-ease." Suddenly, the stone cracked with a sharp, echoing snap. A hairline fracture raced across its surface beneath Samuel's palms. The trapped figure below convulsed violently, their muffled screams merging with the hum in the chamber. The pulse inside Samuel's chest intensified. His veins felt electrified. His muscles locked. Sweat poured down his temples as the air around him seemed to collapse inward. He could hear whispering now, hundreds of faint, overlapping voices, some crying, some begging, some silent. "They are not dead," he realized aloud, horror dawning in his voice. "No," Daniel replied evenly. "They were transformed." The fracture in the stone widened. Light, if it could be called that, began seeping from the crack. Not bright, not warm, but pale and unnatural. It crawled upward like fog made of bone. Samuel felt something tearing at his consciousness, pulling at the edges of his identity. His thoughts no longer felt entirely his own. The fear he had sensed earlier was no longer external. It was flowing through him. Lillian leaned closer, her eyes reflecting the pale glow from the slab. "You're strong," she murmured. "Stronger than most." That wasn't comfort. It was evaluation. Samuel realized then what the ritual truly was. They weren't selecting victims at random. They were testing resilience, harvesting fear from those who could endure it, refining it, keeping the strongest, discarding the rest. The slab split open with a deafening crack. The figure beneath it went utterly still, and the pulse inside Samuel's chest stopped, only to restart with a force so violent he collapsed to his knees. The shadows recoiled slightly, as if satisfied. Eleanor stepped back, studying him with cold fascination. "Well," she said quietly, "he survived the second threshold." Daniel and Lillian released him simultaneously. Samuel fell forward onto the cold stone floor, gasping for air that tasted like rue and dust. His heartbeat slowly steadied, but it felt different now, stronger, colder, entangled. He understood something terrible. The ritual had not ended. It had accepted him, and acceptance meant expectation. Above them, from somewhere inside the funeral home, a door slammed. Hard. Not part of the ritual, not planned. Eleanor's head snapped upward. For the first time since Samuel arrived, she looked uncertain. Next, we discover who or what has entered Blackwood's funeral home, and why even the family may no longer be fully in control. Section 12. An uninvited presence. The door upstairs didn't just close, it slammed with intention. The sound ripped through the house like a gunshot, shattering the ritual's heavy rhythm. Dust drifted from the ceiling beams. The candles along the chamber walls flickered violently, some extinguishing altogether. Eleanor's composure fractured, only slightly, but enough. Daniel straightened immediately. Lillian's head tilted, listening with sharp precision. Samuel lay on the stone floor, chest heaving, heart still pounding with that unnatural second rhythm inside him. The pulse in the slab had quieted, but it hadn't disappeared. It lingered like a dormant animal. Another sound followed. Slow footsteps, measured, not hesitant, not panicked. Someone walking through the funeral home as though they belonged there. "That's not possible," Daniel murmured under his breath. Eleanor's jaw tightened. "No one enters without invitation." But someone had. The footsteps moved across the parlor above them. The wooden floorboards creaked in deliberate sequence, not searching, not wandering, approaching. Samuel forced himself upright, leaning against the cold stone wall. His body still felt foreign, charged, altered, but adrenaline cut through the fog. For the first time since entering the chamber, the family's attention had shifted away from him, and that terrified him even more. A low hum began building again, but this time it wasn't coming from the slab. It was coming from the house itself. The walls vibrated subtly. The air pressure shifted, making Samuel's ears pop painfully. The metallic scent sharpened, reacting. Lillian whispered almost to herself, "It feels wrong." Eleanor turned sharply. Silence. The footsteps reached the top of the hidden staircase, then stopped. The chamber door handle turned slowly, not forced, unlocked, impossible. The door ked open. A man stood at the threshold, silhouetted by dim light from the hallway above. He was older, mid-60s perhaps, grey coat, dark hat, his posture calm, deliberate. His eyes adjusted to the candlelight quickly, and he smiled. "Good evening, Eleanor," he said smoothly. "It's been a long time." The name hit Samuel like ice water. This was not a stranger. This was someone who knew them. Eleanor's expression hardened into something dangerous. "You were told never to return." The man stepped inside, closing the door behind him gently. The chamber temperature seemed to drop 10 degrees. "I wasn't invited," he replied evenly, "but neither was I erased." Daniel moved protectively in front of the slab. Lillian's hands hovered near the jars lining the shelves. Samuel watched, confused and breathless. The newcomer's gaze shifted to him. "And this must be the new candidate," the man observed quietly. "Candidate, not victim, not witness." Samuel's stomach twisted. The man removed his gloves slowly, revealing scarred hands, burned, etched with faint markings that resembled the symbols on the chamber floor. "I see you're still harvesting," he continued. "Still convincing yourselves it's control." Eleanor's voice dropped, lower than Samuel had yet heard. "Leave. Now." But the man didn't move. Instead, he stepped closer to the slab, and the dormant pulse inside it flickered in response. Samuel felt the second heartbeat in his chest stutter. Recognition. The house recognized him. "You never mastered it," the man said calmly. "You only borrowed it." The shadows along the walls began pulling toward him, not away. The metallic mist swirled, no longer obedient to Daniel or Lillian. For the first time, the chamber did not feel like the Blackwoods' domain. It felt contested. Samuel's breath quickened. If this man knew the ritual, if he had survived it, then what had truly been happening in this house for decades? The older man looked directly at Samuel again. "You don't belong to them yet," he said evenly. "And if you stay another hour, you won't belong to yourself at all." Eleanor stepped forward, fury barely contained. "You abandoned the house," she hissed. "You forfeited your claim." Claim? Samuel's mind raced. This wasn't an outsider. This was family. And whatever power lived inside Blackwood's funeral home, it was never meant for just one bloodline. The pulse inside Samuel's chest beat harder, faster, unstable. The man extended his scarred hand toward him. "Choose carefully," he said quietly. Behind him, the chamber door began closing on its own. Next, we uncover the truth about the man who returned and the origin of the Blackwood family's terrifying power. Section 13. The Brother Who Survived. The chamber door slammed shut behind the older man with a force that shook dust from the ceiling. Silence followed. Not ritual silence, not controlled silence. but the kind that signals something ancient has been disturbed. Samuel's pulse was spiraling now, the second heartbeat inside him pounding erratically. The slab beneath Daniel's feet vibrated in uneven tremors, responding not to Eleanor, but to the man who had just returned. Eleanor's voice cut through the darkness. "You should have died in this house, Victor." Victor. The name echoed. The older man gave a thin smile. "I nearly did." Daniel's expression shifted for the first time. Not fear, not anger, but recognition. Lillian's whisper barely carried through the chamber. "Uncle." Samuel felt the air grow heavier. This wasn't an intruder. This was blood. Victor stepped forward slowly, his scarred hands illuminated by trembling candlelight. The markings etched into his skin mirrored the symbols carved into the stone floor. "You taught them the ritual," Eleanor accused. Victor shook his head. "No, Father did. I tried to end it." The hum in the walls deepened at the mention of the past. Samuel's mind raced. "Father?" Eleanor's jaw clenched. "Control is inherited." "No," Victor replied calmly. "Obsession is." The temperature dropped sharply. The metallic mist shifted direction, coiling toward Victor's boots instead of the slab. The power inside the room was no longer centralized. It was divided. Samuel forced himself upright, pain radiating through his limbs. "What is this place?" he demanded hoarsely. Victor's gaze softened, briefly. "It's not a funeral home," he said. "It's a conduit." The word landed heavily. "Your grandfather," Victor continued, his eyes never leaving Eleanor, "discovered something beneath this land, something responsive. It feeds on emotional extremes, fear most efficiently." Samuel's stomach turned as realization dawned. Harvested fear wasn't symbolic. It was fuel. "We learned how to channel it," Eleanor said coldly. "We refined it. We mastered it." Victor stepped closer to the slab. It pulsed faintly in response to him. "You mistake tolerance for mastery," he said quietly. Daniel stepped between them. "He's destabilizing it." Indeed, the chamber was reacting violently. The jars along the shelves rattled. Fine cracks began splitting across the floor symbols. The faint glow flickered inconsistently. Samuel's second heartbeat faltered, then slammed painfully against his ribs. "What did you do to me?" he gasped. Victor turned toward him fully now. "They tethered you," he said. "The ritual bonds resilient minds to the conduit. Most break. You didn't." Eleanor's eyes burned with intensity. "He passed the threshold." "Barely," Victor replied. "And if you push him further, the conduit won't just take from him." "It will what?" Lillian demanded. Victor's answer was simple. "It will open." The word seemed to fracture the air itself. The slab trembled violently. A deep crack split down its center, widening rapidly. The hum in the chamber grew into a deafening vibration. Dust rained from above. Samuel clutched his chest as agony tore through him. The second heartbeat accelerated uncontrollably. Eleanor's calm finally cracked. "Stabilize it." Daniel rushed toward the jars, grabbing 2 glowing containers. Lillian resumed chanting, but her voice wavered. Victor stood firm. "You've been feeding it for decades," he said quietly, "but you never asked what happens when it's full." The crack in the slab burst open with a blinding flash of pale light. A pressure wave slammed through the chamber, knocking Samuel flat. The candles extinguished simultaneously. Darkness swallowed the room, and from beneath the shattered stone, something exhaled. Not wind, not air, but awareness. Samuel felt it press against his mind, vast and cold and curious. The conduit was no longer contained, and the Blackwood family, for the first time in generations, was not in control. Next, we discover what has awakened beneath the funeral home, and whether Samuel is the key to stopping it, or unleashing it completely. Section 14. What the house was feeding. Darkness swallowed the chamber whole, not the gentle dimming of candlelight, but a suffocating, total void. Samuel couldn't see his own hands in front of his face. The metallic scent vanished instantly, replaced by something colder, older, like deep earth that had never known sunlight. And then, breathing. Not from any human throat. A vast, slow inhalation rolled through the stone walls, vibrating the floor beneath them. Samuel's second heartbeat stopped completely. For one suspended, horrifying second, there was nothing inside his chest. Then, something else answered in its place. A resonance, low, endless, watching. Victor's voice cut through the void. "Do not speak." Too late. Daniel gasped sharply somewhere to Samuel's left. Lillian began whispering again, frantic now, her chant broken and uneven. Eleanor said nothing, but Samuel could hear her breathing, controlled but shallow. The slab had not simply cracked. It had opened. A faint glow began to rise from the center of the chamber, not bright, not warm, but pale and diffused, like moonlight seen under water. It illuminated the edges of the stone pit where the slab once lay. There was no body beneath it now. Only depth. Immeasurable depth. Samuel forced himself up onto trembling elbows. The glow revealed something shifting within the pit, not a shape, not a creature, but movement that bent around perception. Looking directly at it made his vision blur painfully. "It's awake," Lillian whispered. "No," Victor corrected. "It's aware." The walls began to hum again, but this time the rhythm did not match any human heartbeat. It was slower, vastly slower. The sound seemed to bend time itself. Samuel's mind flooded with sensation. Images, not his own. A field where something ancient first pressed upward from beneath the soil. A man, older, severe, standing over this disturbed ground with curiosity instead of fear. The first ritual, the first scream, the first offering. Grandfather. The conduit had not been discovered. It had been unearthed. "You fed it terror," Victor said evenly, "but fear was only the beginning." The glow intensified slightly, and Samuel felt pressure against his thoughts. Not invasive, not violent, evaluating. Eleanor stepped forward despite everything. "We maintained balance," she said, her voice steady, though the floor trembled beneath her heels. "It never exceeded containment." Victor's scarred hands flexed at his sides, because it was never full. The realization moved through the chamber like frost. Decades of harvested fear. Decades of resilient minds tethered and drained. Samuel staggered as something brushed against his consciousness directly. Not words. Intent. Curiosity. He felt himself being measured, not as prey, not as fuel, but as something different, compatible. Daniel saw it too. It's stabilizing around him. All eyes turned to Samuel. The glow from the pit shifted, narrowing subtly, aligning with his position. The pressure in his chest returned, but it was no longer violent. It was synchronizing, like two systems attempting to lock into rhythm. Victor stepped toward him urgently. "You have to break the tether." "I don't know how," Samuel shouted. Eleanor's eyes gleamed in the pale light. "If he severs it now," she said softly, "the backlash will tear this house apart." "And if he doesn't?" Victor demanded. No one answered. The glow deepened, spreading outward along the cracked floor symbols. The jars along the shelves exploded one by one, releasing fine metallic dust into the air that dissolved instantly into nothingness. The house groaned above them. Wood splintered, glass shattered. The conduit was expanding beyond the chamber. Samuel dropped to his knees, clutching his head as a flood of perception overwhelmed him. He could feel the entire structure of the funeral home, the beams, the foundation, the land beneath it, and something far below that, ancient, patient, hungry, but no longer for fear alone. It had evolved, and Samuel was its new anchor. Victor grabbed him by the collar. "Listen to me. If you let it synchronize fully, it won't just live in the house anymore." Samuel's breath trembled. "Where will it live?" he whispered. Victor's eyes darkened. "Through you." Behind them, the pit widened. The glow flared violently. and something inside the depth shifted upward for the first time. Next, we discover what rises from the conduit, and whether Samuel can break free before he becomes its permanent vessel. Section 15. The Rising. The glow from the pit no longer flickered. It steadied, deepened, focused. Samuel could feel it aligning with his breathing, matching the rhythm of the unnatural pulse inside his chest. The air above the pit began to distort, bending like heat rising from asphalt, but colder, far colder. Victor released his collar slowly. "It's choosing form," he said under his breath. The floor trembled again, this time not from instability, but from emergence. Something was rising, not climbing, not crawling, phasing upward through the depth as though gravity did not apply to it. Samuel forced himself to look. The first thing he saw was not a face or a limb. It was outline. A suggestion of structure in the pale glow, a vertical elongation, edges that didn't stay fixed when he tried to focus on them. His mind struggled to interpret it, slipping each time it tried to categorize what it was seeing. Daniel staggered backward. Lillian dropped her jar. Eleanor did not move. The shape rose higher, reaching the level of the broken slab. Where it passed, the air crystallized faintly, forming hairline fractures in the stone. Samuel felt his own consciousness stretch thin. Memories that were not his flickered across his vision again, but now they were older. Earlier than grandfather. Earlier than the land deed. Earlier than the first structure built on this soil. A presence waiting beneath ground that had once been forest. Waiting beneath something even older than that. It had not been discovered. It had been disturbed. The rising shape paused, hovering just above the chamber floor. It was taller than any of them. And then it shifted. The outline thinned, narrowed, and compressed. Samuel felt a sudden wrenching inside his chest. The second heartbeat jolted violently as the shape folded inward on itself like collapsing glass. "It's adapting," Victor breathed. To what? Samuel realized with horror. To him. The distortion condensed further, the pale glow dimming until a figure stood where the open pit had been. Human-sized, vaguely human-shaped, featureless. Its surface appeared smooth, reflective, not like skin, not like metal, like something unfinished. The chamber was silent now, except for Samuel's shaking breath. The figure tilted its head slightly, mirroring him. "No," Victor said sharply. "Do not engage." But Samuel couldn't look away. The pressure in his skull increased. A tremor spread through his arms and legs. He felt the tether pulling tighter, sinking. The figure took one step forward. It made no sound, but the entire house groaned in response. Wood splintered above. Plaster cracked. The conduit was no longer confined to the chamber. It was stabilizing its avatar. Eleanor stepped toward it, awe overtaking calculation for the first time. "We fed you," she whispered. The figure's head turned slowly toward her. Samuel felt a flash of emotion that wasn't his. Not gratitude. Correction. Eleanor staggered as if struck by an invisible force. Blood trickled from her nose. "We did not feed it," Victor said hoarsely. "We educated it." The figure shifted again, its surface rippling slightly. And faintly, features began to form. Not Eleanor's, not Daniel's, not Victor's, Samuel's. The outline of his face pressed outward from the smooth surface like something molding clay from within. Samuel stumbled backward, heart racing wildly. "It's copying me," he gasped. "It's integrating you," Victor corrected grimly. The figure's eyes opened. They were empty, but they were aligned perfectly with his. The tether snapped tighter. Samuel screamed as a violent surge tore through his nervous system. Every fear he had ever felt rose to the surface simultaneously, but they were no longer chaotic. They were organized, catalogued, strengthened. The figure took another silent step forward, its form sharpened, more detailed, more him. Daniel whispered in disbelief, It's not rising to destroy us. Victor's face hardened. No, he said quietly. It's rising to replace him. The house above them began collapsing inward. The chamber ceiling cracked. Stone debris fell around them. The conduit had completed adaptation. And Samuel was no longer just tethered. He was template. Next we discover whether Samuel can sever the bond in time, or if the Blackwoods will witness the birth of something wearing his face. The rain did not fall that night. It attacked. Water pounded against the warped roof of Blackwood Son's funeral home like fists demanding entry. The gutters overflowed within minutes, spilling torrents down the cracked brick walls. Thunder shook the foundation, and lightning turned the embalming room windows into brief sheets of white fire. Daniel stood in the hallway outside the preparation room, listening to the building struggle against the storm. Then he heard it. A sound he had never heard before. Water. Not outside. Inside. A slow, unnatural gurgling beneath the floorboards. He followed it to the back corridor, to the trap door that led beneath the embalming room. The same door Caleb once warned him never to open during heavy rain. The same door Sarah always kept locked. Tonight, the lock was broken. Water seeped from its edges, thin at first, then thicker, dark, clouded, carrying something with it. Daniel's pulse thudded in his ears as he knelt and pulled the door open. A rush of damp air burst upward, thick with mold and decay. The narrow staircase below had become a descending channel of muddy water. And it was rising. The underground room, the hidden chamber, was flooding. He grabbed a flashlight and descended. Each step splashed. The beam cut through brown water swirling with debris, wood fragments, old paper, fabric strips. Something pale brushed his ankle. He flinched and looked down. A hand. A lifeless, grey-white hand floated briefly past before disappearing beneath the murk. The drainage system had failed. The shallow graves beneath the floor were being uncovered, exposed, revealed. Daniel reached the chamber at the bottom. The scene was chaos. The makeshift burial pits had collapsed under the flood. Coffin lids cracked open. Bones protruded through soaked soil. Torn clothing drifted in the water like drowned flags. One skull, Howler's, submerged, stared upward with empty sockets. The dead were rising, not by choice but by force, and the storm was undoing decades of secrecy. Above him, a door slammed. Footsteps. Not one pair. Two, Sarah and Caleb. They stopped at the top of the staircase. Neither of them spoke. Daniel turned slowly, flashlight beam catching their silhouettes against flickering lightning from the hallway window above. For a moment, the three of them stared at one another, father, mother, son, standing above a flood of buried truth. Sarah stepped down first. The water soaked her shoes instantly. She looked around the chamber, without shock, without grief, only calculation. "It was never meant to last forever," she said calmly. Caleb descended beside her, jaw tight, eyes hollow. "The rain came early this year." Daniel's breath trembled. "It's all coming out." Sarah tilted her head slightly. "Only if someone sees it." Another thunderclap cracked overhead. The power went out. Darkness swallowed the chamber. In that pitch-black silence, Daniel heard something shift behind him in the water. Not bone, not wood. Movement. And then, a weak, choking gasp. Not from the dead, from someone still alive. The storm had exposed more than bodies. It had uncovered a survivor, and whatever lay buried beneath the funeral home was not finished with them yet. Next, we uncover who was trapped below, and why Sarah Blackwood was prepared to silence even her own blood.
While funeral homes are meant to provide dignity and care to the deceased, and comfort to grieving families, real cases have shown that some individuals in positions of trust abuse that authority for criminal gain. One documented example comes from the skin hunters scandal in Poland. In the early 2000s, Hospital casualty workers in the city of Łódź were found to have murdered elderly patients so that they could sell information about their death to funeral homes. These workers killed or hastened the death of vulnerable patients and then informed funeral directors in exchange for bribes, allowing the funeral homes to contact bereaved families first and win business. At least 5 patients were proven to have been killed in this scheme, and authorities believed many more victims were involved. This disturbing case shows how people in roles connected to death care, where trust and vulnerability are highest, can sometimes exploit those conditions for profit or concealment, revealing a grim side of human behavior around funerals and loss.
The gasp came again. Weak, wet, desperate. In the suffocating dark beneath Blackwood Son's funeral home, it sounded almost unreal, like the last breath of someone already gone. Water sloshed around Daniel's knees as he swung the flashlight blindly until it flickered back to life. The beam trembled across the flooded chamber. And then it found her. A girl. Half submerged against the far wall, her wrists bound with embalming cord, her dark hair plastered to her pale face. Mud streaked her cheeks. Her eyes fluttered open under the harsh light. She was alive. Caleb swore under his breath. Sarah did not move. Daniel pushed through the water toward the girl. Each step churned up fragments of exposed remains. His shoes struck something hard beneath the surface, a rib cage shifting under his weight. But he kept going. The girl coughed violently as he reached her, muddy water spilling from her mouth. She could not have been more than 20. Fresh needle marks dotted the inside of her arm. She was next week, Caleb muttered flatly. Next week. Daniel felt something inside him fracture. The girl tried to speak, but only a broken whisper emerged. Help. Please. He moved to untie her wrists. Stop. Sarah's voice cut through the chamber like a blade. Daniel froze. Sarah stepped forward slowly, her expression composed, almost maternal. The storm changed the schedule, that's all. She's alive, Daniel shot back. Not for long, Sarah replied. Lightning flashed through the open trapdoor above, illuminating her face in cold blue light. There was no rage in her eyes, no panic, only certainty. Caleb waded closer, blocking the staircase. If she talks, it's over. Daniel felt the weight of the moment pressing into his lungs. All his life, he had believed the killings were strategic, controlled, contained. But now he saw the truth. They were addicted to it. The secrecy, the ritual, the power over breath itself. The girl's fingers curled weakly around Daniel's sleeve. In that contact, something irreversible happened. He chose. Daniel ripped the cord from her wrists and pulled her upward. We're leaving. Caleb lunged first. The collision sent all 3 of them crashing into the water. The flashlight flew from Daniel's grip and vanished beneath the surface. Darkness swallowed them again. Hands grabbed his throat. Caleb's. Water filled Daniel's mouth as he struggled. Their father's strength was shocking, desperate. Decades of violence driving every muscle. You don't throw away blood, Caleb hissed. Daniel drove his elbow backward blindly. It connected with bone. Caleb loosened for a split second. Long enough. Daniel shoved him off and stumbled toward where he believed the staircase was. The girl clung to him weakly. Behind them, Sarah's voice rose, no longer calm. If you walk out that door, she said, you will not be my son. Another flash of lightning cut through the darkness. In that white-hot instant, Daniel saw her holding something long and metallic, an embalming trocar, sharp, and aimed directly at his back. Next we witness the final confrontation inside the funeral home, and the choice that will decide who walks out alive. Lightning split the sky as Sarah lunged. Daniel twisted just as the trocar drove forward. The sharpened steel grazed his shoulder instead of piercing his spine. Pain exploded down his arm. The girl screamed weakly behind him. Water surged around their legs as thunder shook the foundation. Caleb rose from the flood behind them, blood streaming from a cut near his temple, eyes burning with something beyond anger. It was not fear of prison. It was fear of exposure, of irrelevance. Sarah attacked again, faster this time. Daniel shoved the girl toward the staircase. "Climb!" he shouted. She tried, fingers slipping against wet wood. Caleb grabbed Daniel from behind, forcing him down into the water. The chamber swallowed his face. Mud and decay filled his nose. His lungs seized. Above the surface he could hear splashing, Sarah's sharp breathing, the storm tearing at the roof. This was how it ended, he thought. Not in secrecy, in rot. He forced his weight backward violently, slamming Caleb against the cracked coffin beside them. The wood splintered, bones spilled into the water between them. Caleb lost balance, hitting the submerged floor hard. Daniel surged up, gasping. The girl had reached halfway up the staircase. Sarah stepped into his path again, blocking him from helping her further. Rain poured through the open trapdoor now, turning the underground chamber into a rising grave. "You were supposed to inherit this," she said quietly. "Not this," Daniel answered. Her expression shifted, not to rage, but to betrayal. Behind her, Caleb stood again, but something had changed. Water rushed heavily through a fractured wall near the burial pits. The old structure was failing. Soil from the hillside behind the funeral home was collapsing inward. The chamber was about to cave. Daniel saw it first. "Move!" he shouted. The back wall gave way with a thunderous crash. Mud, rainwater, and debris exploded into the chamber like a tidal wave. Caleb disappeared instantly beneath the surge. Sarah staggered but didn't run. For one strange second she simply stood there as the flood swallowed the room she had controlled for decades. Then the earth dropped beneath her feet. Daniel grabbed the railing of the staircase with one hand and reached for her with the other. Their eyes locked. She did not take it. Whether from pride, denial, or choice, he would never know. The collapse roared, sealing the lower chamber in churning mud and shattered wood. The sound was deafening. The building above trembled. Daniel pulled himself upward, dragging the girl with him. Moments later, they burst out into the embalming room as sirens wailed faintly in the distance. Neighbors had finally seen the flooding and called for help. The funeral home behind them groaned. And then the back half of Blackwood Sons gave way entirely, sinking into the mud-soaked earth as dawn cracked faint and grey over the horizon. By morning the storm had passed. Police would uncover bones, records, evidence of decades-long disappearances. Headlines would call it a house of horror. Reporters would ask how no one noticed. But in the wreckage, one truth lingered heavier than the mud. Monsters do not always hide in abandoned places. Sometimes they greet you at the door with sympathy, soft voices, steady hands, and they wait for you to trust them. This story is entirely fictional. The characters, locations, and events are products of imagination created for narrative purposes only.